Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this webinar on the state of higher education for Black Californians. My name is Michelle Siqueiros. I am the president of the Campaign for College Opportunity. And as many of you know, our organization has been single focused on one priority, and that is to ensure that more Californians have the opportunity to go to college, and that once they get there, they complete college. And we've been unabashed in our focus on not just disaggregating data by race, ethnicity, and gender, but really at highlighting the persistent inequality in college preparation, success, and access for our students. And in doing this in a manner that really honors the experience of Black students, Latinx students, Asian American, and Indigenous students in our state. Those of you familiar with the signature series of reports know that we didn't just get started today in doing this kind of research. In fact, for over a decade, we've been disaggregating data by race, ethnicity, and gender. And we launched this signature series in 2013, and we have consistently updated these reports so that we can not just see how we're doing, where we're improving, what are the continuing challenges, but this research for us really informs the policy solutions that we continue to advocate and advance. Many of you know that our research has in fact informed our championing of streamlining the transfer pathway for our students through the creation of the associate degree for transfer, our fight against placement exams that are flawed and disproportionately put students, especially Black and Latinx students, in remedial courses in the community colleges and in the CSU, and fighting against the use of tests like the SAT and ACT in university admissions. We've also been championing solutions to ensure that there is greater faculty diversity, because a sense of well-being, welcoming environments for our students is essential, and that can't happen if students can't see themselves represented amongst the staff and faculty and leaders that are at the campuses they attend. These reports would not be possible without the incredible team at the Campaign for College Opportunity. You'll get to hear from Dr. Vikash Reddy, the lead researcher of this report, who's done a phenomenal job at laying out the data before you. He was assisted by Tyler Campbell, who you will also hear from. He's been an amazing research fellow. And of course, I have an incredible team led by Audrey Dow, our Senior Vice President, Shay Collins, our Director of Communications, and the beautiful report that you get to see designed and worked on by Lily Garcia on our team. Jackie Rodriguez and Raquel Gonzalez have also been just incredibly phenomenal at putting this work together. So I know that you'll join me with a virtual applause for each and every one of them. When we started this series of reports, one of the things that has come of them beyond the policy successes that we have had was making new friends. One of those was Dr. Luke Wood. He is now a board member at the Campaign for College Opportunity, but we first met him many years ago when we profiled his work as a scholar and researcher on minority males in the community college system. So today I get to introduce Dr. Luke Wood, who consulted on this project and gave us so much of his wisdom and counsel. I hope you'll also join me in giving him a belated happy birthday as he celebrated his first and hopefully last quarantine birthday. Dr. Luke Wood, welcome.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you for those who are putting on this wonderful event. And I'm so just proud to be part of the campaign and the incredible team that's doing great work across our state. I would say for those of you who don't know, the campaign has been at the forefront of every major change in equity in higher education in California in recent memory. And given the importance of our Black population as part of that equity conversation, I'm very proud to see this report come out. And it also comes to us at a very critical time. You know, many people have said that we are in the midst of two pandemics. First, the pandemic of COVID-19 that has borne disproportionate infections, unemployment, and unfortunately even death for our Black community. But we're also in the midst of the racial pandemic, which we saw a blip of that this summer, the murder of George Floyd, but so many other names that we can think of: Breonna Taylor, Tony McDade, Rashad Brooks, and far too many others. And we know that in the midst of this pandemic of anti-Blackness, that many colleges and universities and schools have responded by releasing statements to their communities, talking about the importance of addressing racial challenges, and even provided thought-provoking thoughts on what we can do to better improve our circumstances. And of course, there were also some institutions that didn't release anything or waited far too long to do so. But statements in and of themselves are meaningless. We can do hearing circle hall listening sessions, and all those things are important because they serve to provide a potential for part of the challenges, but they fail to fully address anger, frustration, and exhaustion that is palpable within the Black community. And while these approaches can be positive steps, they really represent mere first steps in the long journey. The challenges that we see facing our Black community are not new. They are part of hundreds of years of policies, systems, and culture. And we see this not only in the challenges in education, but the challenges that we see in policing and the parallels between how Black lives are undervalued and over-criminalized in policing, and how Black minds are similarly undervalued and over-criminalized in education. And honestly, that's why this report is so important today, because it presents us with recommendations on what to do and how we can better improve our higher education system and even our K-12 schools. And that could not be any more important than it is today in the midst of this racial pandemic. And while you'll see that there are bright spots that are highlighted throughout the data, there are also some concerning trends. And partly for me as a community college researcher and someone who's dedicated my career towards improving outcomes for Black students in our community colleges, one of the most disappointing and stark findings from this report for me was knowing that last time when the data was looked at, that we found that 15% of our Black students were transferring to for-profit institutions. 15%. It's a high percentage. But now in this new data, we find that that has went up to now 38%. If there's nothing else that should move people towards change, it should be knowing that we have to do something better. And there's recommendations embodied within this report that will help us do that: hiring more Black faculty, recommitting ourselves to ADT, and limiting access to federal aid for for-profit institutions that oftentimes serve to disadvantage and further exacerbate issues that we see in education. So I want to turn it over to the folks. We have a great lineup for you, and this is going to be a critical conversation. And I hope that every single one of you will take this report, send it to your friends, put it out on social media, send it to your listservs, because now is the time for action. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you, Dr. Wood. It's now my pleasure to introduce you all to one of my favorite student leaders. I've had the pleasure of getting to know him as he serves in his role as UC Regent. Jamal Muwakil is an amazing young man, a first-generation student in college. He started at the community college, transferred to UCLA, and is currently working on his PhD. Keep your eyes on this young man because he is doing things in California. Jamal, welcome.
Thank you so much, Michelle, and it's a unique honor to be here with you all. I want to start off by saying good morning and thank all the organizers of this event and the amazing researchers of the Campaign for College Opportunity. I know that I personally benefit from this report each year it's released, and I'm proud to be here alongside these amazing scholars, researchers, and administrators. My name is Jamal Muwakil, and I use he, him pronouns. While I'm currently a PhD student and the voting student regent for the University of California, I primarily identify as a Black Californian and the product of the California public education system. I'm originally from Compton, California, which I like to remind people. Today, I want to tell you a little bit about my journey to where I am and what has helped me and what has hindered me, and a little bit about what we might pay attention to going forward. In my higher education journey, I attended all the community colleges and worked all the jobs. I earned credits from Cerritos College, from the East LA City College, from Santa Monica City College, from Coastline. I attended LACC twice in two different areas and two different times. All while I was working full time in that same time period. I worked at places like Foot Locker in the Lakewood Mall, if you're familiar. I worked at Disneyland. I worked for AT&T. I worked for a credit union. I say all of this to say that it's unfortunate that my scenario is very common for first generation Black college students. And it's a shame that that my journey is a bit more normal than it is aberrant. People really talk about this because it's a very inconvenient narrative. It's very easy to frame the idea of going to college as a thing that students do in isolation. It's very easy to just, yeah. As sometimes I find myself guessing through the process. I didn't really have the resources or the people that I can tap and ask some of those simple logistical questions about how do you do this, or what does financial aid look like, or how do you actually attend college. And so I did opt to go to the community college to stay closer to my safety net and also save money while I stumbled through the process. And there were many setbacks. Guessing my way through the transfer process resulted in a 10-year journey from the time I graduated high school until the time that I transferred to UCLA. Obstacles that like limited access to academic counselors, unclear financial aid pathways, and confusing transfer requirements contributed to this protracted time. And while I still say that California has the greatest public higher education system in the world, uh, stories like mine show that we still have quite a long way to go. After transferring to UCLA, I was greeted with a highly resourced environment that was still not as welcoming as it could have been. I didn't know what it meant to be at a research university. Financial aid was a unique challenge to navigate. And there were some issues with addressing just my general basic needs, right? If there was an emergency that came up, if I got a parking ticket, which is common in LA, or I found myself just at a shortfall, there weren't really the institutional and infrastructural resources for me to lean on in order to kind of free myself up to think in a way that a college student should be able to do. I bring this entire experience with me to my service as the voting University of California student regent. This materializes in me serving as the chair of the Regental Subcommittee on Student Basic Needs that concluded this past November when we released a report that was circumspect and really detailed some of the issues that are facing our students on our campuses that disproportionately affect our Black students. I made recommendations to campus administrators, California legislators, and student body staff. I'm also currently working on a task force for our former foster youth within the University of California to try to set aside some more resources to engage that vulnerable demographic. I'm also very proud to say that my first vote on the board was to eliminate standardized testing from consideration for admissions into the University of California. And I'm very proud to be alongside other folks who lobbied and fought for that to come to pass. We have a lot of work to do, but I'm very confident that with the types of folks that are currently on this call, with the Campaign for College Opportunity, and with the empirical basis and policy recommendations that are coming out of reports like the State of Higher Education from Black Californians, we have the people, we have the goodwill, and we have the means to effectuate meaningful change to benefit Black Californians in the future. I look forward to the conversation and your questions today. And I want to pass it back to you, Michelle. Thank you for having me to be here.
Thank you so much. I want to thank both Jamal for his story. I think it's really important as we look at data on student outcomes that we actually think about the students behind them. And so I would encourage you all to keep that story in mind as really powerful context for some of the numbers that are to come. I also want to add my gratitude to Michelle's insofar as Dr. Wood. Your introduction was phenomenal. Folks can find that also in the full version of the report. But I really value your feedback and your guidance as we've gone through this work. It's been just incredibly helpful. Great. So, as Michelle mentioned, the research team here is Michelle, Tyler, and myself. I do also want to echo what Michelle said before, that this is a team effort. Our graphic design folks make those words come to life, our webinar support, our communications people, really everybody at the Campaign for College Opportunity is involved in creating these reports. We are also very fortunate to have friends who do this work themselves in other contexts and from other angles. We will be joined by some of them later today. The folks who are on this slide will be with us later today on our session. But I would note, check the full acknowledgements, the full report for more. We really have been blessed with a number of friends outside of the campaign. One final request before I dive into the data. These reports are powerful only if folks are sharing them and helping us amplify the message. The full report is available on our website, collegecampaign.org. We invite you all to tweet and tag us. We're using the hashtag #BlackInHigherEd today. And all of our Twitter handles for Michelle, Tyler, and myself are here. And onto the main event. With over 2.1 million Black residents calling the state home, California is home to the 5th largest Black population in the United States. That makes what we do in California significant, and it means that we have to be leaders in our nation's fight for equity. Just over a third of California's Black residents are located in Los Angeles County, but we also see significant concentrations in the North and the South in areas that are critical to our economic future. Before I dive into the education statistics, I want to take just a moment to recognize that Black Californians are disproportionately represented among housing insecure, food insecure, job insecure, and incarcerated populations within the state. Infant mortality is more than double for Black babies than it is for white babies in California, and 1 in 4 Black children in California grows up in a household in poverty. In spite of this, we see resilience among our students. There is great news, and Black success is all around us. 88% of 19-year-olds in California have a high school diploma. 80% of Black students who are supported to complete the A through G course requirements for UC and CSU eligibility enroll in college within a year of their high school graduation. Placement reforms at California's community colleges have dramatically increased access to transfer-level English and math courses for Black community college students. And the CSU's decision to replace remedial courses with support for students in college-level coursework has unblocked that pathway for thousands of students each year. Over the past 5 years, the CSU has doubled the percentage of Black students supported to graduate in 4 years. And the UC now graduates more than half of Black freshmen in what we would call an on-time 4 years, and more than half of Black transfer students finish at the UC in 2 years. But there is work to do. 41% of Black high school graduates meet the A through G course standards. That means that there are over 13,000 Black high school graduates who have their high school diploma, but who don't have access to the state's 4-year systems of higher education. It's also important to note this number of 41% is the 41% of graduates and doesn't account for the 23% of the cohort that didn't make it to graduation. Furthermore, we know, as I mentioned a minute ago, that 80% of Black high school graduates who meet the A through G course requirements enroll in college within 12 months of their high school graduation. When we set our Black students up for success, they succeed time and time again. We must do more to ensure that high schools serving Black students have robust A through G course offerings and support students to enroll in and complete these courses. we must also make the A through G curriculum the default expectation for every student in California's high schools. Looking at our higher education landscape, there are over 200,000 Black students in California's colleges and universities. More than 3/4 of them, as you can see from this chart, are enrolled in public institutions within the state. And while we noted the positive news regarding graduation rates at the UC and the CSU, we should also note that these two segments combined are educating just 12% of Black Californians, or I should say Black students in California. The California community colleges are clearly a critical component of California's higher education landscape, though we note that the 64% that you see here today is 8 percentage points lower than it was when we looked at these data 2 years ago. And we note also the percentage of Black students enrolled in for-profit colleges and universities in California. When we examined these data 2 years ago, that number was 10%. And Dr. Wood has already pointed to one of the statistics that goes along with it around transfer enrollment that we think is very important in that story. We find this particularly concerning given the low completion rates, default rates, and generally poor economic payoff associated with for-profit institutions, both in California and nationwide. The fall of 2019 was the first semester for which California's community college placement reforms were in full effect at colleges across the state. AB 705 required students to be placed into the level of coursework that gave them the best shot at completing transfer level English and math within a year. As we can see from data analyzed and reported by the Public Policy Institute of California, the number of students completing transfer level English and math surged compared to the period prior to the reform. Pre-reform, only 7% of Black freshmen passed transfer level math in their first semester. Post-reform, that number increased almost fourfold. The percentage of Black students completing transfer level English more than tripled. This initial impact is sure to increase the number of Black students who will complete their degrees and transfer to four-year institutions. But as the graph makes plainly clear, equity gaps persist. Black Californians, as you'll see from this chart, are underrepresented at our state's public four-year colleges and universities. The UC enrolls fewer than 10,000 Black undergraduates, and that number includes students who identify as Black as well as another race. Or I should say Black alone, as well as Black in combination with another race. That means fewer than 10,000 Black students are accessing the world-renowned higher education system in their own backyard. And we also note that 15% of students at for-profit institutions are Black. As already noted, for-profit colleges and universities have generally low completion rates, higher debt burdens for students, and higher default rates than institutions in other sectors. Among those entering college in 2004, according to one study, 43% of students at for-profit institutions defaulted on their loans within 12 years. Among students in the same cohort who had never attended a for-profit institution, that number was just 11%. Last fall, the campaign partnered with Third Way to release our report, The Personal Payoff of an Education in California. In that report, we found that 42% of for-profit colleges and universities in California offered no payoff for their students. In contrast, 90% of public institutions provided a payoff within 5 years. We must invest in capacity at our state's public colleges and universities to ensure they have space for all of the students who can go there. Turning to completion and starting with the community colleges, we see that over the past 5 years, the community colleges have increased the number of Black students earning degrees, certificates, and transferring on an annual basis. This is certainly good news. But as again, this graph makes clear, equity gaps are persistent, perhaps on this measure even growing. This slide, the slides that follow, will all highlight the importance of disaggregating our data to ensure that our systems are serving all of our students equitably. And I encourage folks to see more information about completion in our full report. One thing that I do want to highlight about completion in the community colleges beyond the statistic I just shared is the associate degree for transfer. This degree was created 10 years ago to help smooth the transfer pathway for community college students looking to go for a four-year education. This valuable degree guarantees students who earn the requisite 60 units at a California community college automatic junior standing at a CSU when they transfer to a program in their field. This graph shows the percentage of associate degrees that are ADTs. As you can see, the percentage of Black graduates who are awarded ADTs has doubled in the past 5 years. But work remains to close the equity gap. I also want to highlight some findings on transfer rates, because that's such a critical piece of the community college mission. This chart shows us a few things. First, very few students are transferring within 2 years. Additionally, among members of the 2012-13 cohort, just over a third of Black students transferred in 6 years. And that's a rate that remains 9 percentage points lower than that of their white peers. In looking at graduation rates at the CSU, we noted earlier that graduation rates for Black students have doubled over the past 5 years. We note here, however, that this rate is still at 20%. That means only 1 in 5 Black students who enrolled in 2016 graduated in 4 years. The gap in 4-year graduation rates between Black students and their white peers has grown to 25 percentage points. In the full report, we also showed that Black transfer students have improved in graduation rates as well. Among Black transfer students who enrolled in 2018, over a third graduated in 2 years. The 4-year rate for Black transfer students, the most recently available data, was 71%. Completion rates for Black students are strongest at the UC in terms of all of our systems in California. We see here that now more than half of incoming Black freshmen are graduating in 4 years, and half of incoming transfer students are graduating in 2 years, which we show in the full report. After 6 years, 77% of Black freshmen have finished their degrees. This still remains 10 percentage points lower than the rate seen by their white peers. And we note again that very few Black students are attending the University of California. I want to take a step back. I've been in the weeds and the details for each of the segments. And so zooming out and thinking about the segments all together, we see that California's colleges and universities across the board are not supporting their Black students to degree completion at the same rates as their white peers. And just one more time, take a look at that for-profit section. So when we zoom out even further, we know that 2/3 of Black Californians aged 25 to 64 have attended college, but close to half of them did not earn a degree. When we put that together, that leaves the situation you see on this graph. 26% of Californians in the workforce aged 25 to 64 have a bachelor's degree. A further 10% not shown on this graph have an associate's degree. Clearly, we have some work to do. But as I'm here on this webinar, joined by hundreds of folks on a Wednesday morning who are here to learn about the data and join our call to action, I have hope. It is now my privilege to introduce Tyler Campbell. In addition to being a research fellow at the Campaign for College Opportunity, Tyler is a product of California's public schools, or Californian education, though I will say he left us for recently for the colder confines of a doctoral program in Vancouver at Simon Fraser University. More importantly to me, Tyler has been just a phenomenal resource in quarterbacking the data collection for this report. And he's going to share a few words about his own journey and also talk to us about the importance of faculty diversity at our state's public higher education institutions. Tyler?
Thank you so much, Bakash. And thank you all for being here today. You may have seen my face on the cover of the previous State of Higher Education Black Report released back in 2018. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Tyler Campbell. At the release of this report, I was an intern attending UCLA for my undergrad. Since then, I have graduated with the Centennial Class of 2019 and recently received my MA in Communication from Stanford University. I am now a PhD candidate at Simon Fraser University. This year, I came back to work with the campaign as a research fellow, largely because of the critical impact of this specific report. In my role as a fellow, I gathered, cleaned, and analyze data to assist the making of this report, its findings, and policy recommendations. Today, I would like to talk to you about leadership diversity and why we are in dire need of representation at California's colleges and universities. At the California Community College, there are far more Black students for every Black faculty member than white students for every white faculty member. Here on the chart, we can see that there are 121 Black students for every Black faculty member, compared to the 48 white students for every white faculty member. Furthermore, 16 community colleges in the state had 1 or 0 Black faculty members in 2018-2019. Just let that sink in. At the CSU, we can see that there are fewer Black students for each Black faculty member than at the California community colleges. The ratio of 38 Black students for every Black professor is almost 3 times higher than the ratio of 13 white students for every white professor. And although the ratio seems like it has increased, Black students only make up 4% of the total student population. For the UCs, this story is much the same, and equity gaps continue to persist. The data shows us that there are 14 students for every Black faculty member, compared to 5 white students for every white faculty member. At the UCs, Black students only make up 3% of the total student population. Let's be clear, the improved ratio of student per faculty is due to the extremely low Black student enrollment at the CSUs and UCs. In today's climate, we can see how important it is to have diverse representation in leadership. Black students who attend community college or university deserve to feel welcomed and supported. They also deserve to see faculty, staff, and leaders who look like them, understand their experiences, and most importantly, believe in their success. This sense of belonging for Black students on campus is tied to their retention and ultimately their graduation. So improving the number of Black faculty is a must if we would like to see more Black students succeed in higher education. During my educational journey, my first African-American studies course was also the first time I had a professor whom I felt like I could identify with since middle school. Having a Black professor allowed me to visualize myself as an intellectual with the capacity to reach beyond the physical limits of my own conditions. Community college presented opportunities for me to interact with counselors, faculty, administrators, so far as having exchanges with the former chancellor, Constance Carroll. And for the first time in my life, I was exposed to and able to work with Black men and women in various senior level administrative positions. I have been collaborating with the campaign since 2015 as an ambassador with the Student Senate for California Community Colleges. Since that time, the campaign has championed several policy reforms that remove barriers, creating pathways to higher education for students, not only to transfer, but to graduate with a degree. I care immensely about the Black Report. This is because the report provides insight behind the student data that legislators use to make decisions about and without students every single day. Today, I sit before you not as an anomaly, but a testament of just how far institutional investment can empower students to succeed academically. And as I rise up the economic ladder, I continue to do this work and lean on the words of Ella Baker, who encourages us to lift as you climb. This will conclude my story and the data presentation, and I will pass it over to President Michelle Siqueiros to discuss the policy recommendations. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Tyler. You have been amazing on this research, and we're so proud of where you are. And thank you so much for all the work and labor and love, sweat, and tears you've poured into this report. As most of you know, we love the data, but we only love the data because it helps inform action and recommendations. And so I want to share the top recommendations that we have for our policymakers and our educators across California and across our nation. The first recommendation is really focused on Congress and really a strong push to limit the amount of federal financial aid that for-profit colleges are able to take on and use when they don't serve students, and in particular, Black students, very well. You all saw the very disturbing trend of huge increases in Black Californians transferring to for-profit institutions, many of which provide very high cost, high levels of debt, and very low value. We also have very clear recommendations for our state policymakers. We need our governor and state policymakers to make a very intentional commitment that 60% of all Californians should have some high-level degree or high-value credential or degree or certificate in California. Specifically, that Black Californians should also be at 60% having some certificate, degree, or bachelor's degree in our state. We need to ensure that there's greater access to the UC and the CSU and revisit something from the last century that doesn't serve this century, which is that we have caps in the number of students we send directly to the CSU and the UC. We should eliminate those caps and expand them so that we can serve more Californians, and in particular, more Black Californians. We know that when the state has provided greater funding for access at the University of California, the number of Black Californians that can go to the UC has grown. We also want to ensure a stronger pathway through the associate degree for transfer. We see that not enough community college transfer students who are Black are transferring with the associate degree in transfer. And some who aren't transferring with that guarantee into the CSU. What that means is it may take them much longer to earn that bachelor's degree. Finally, our state definitely needs a stronger data system across preschool through the workforce to be able to answer very basic questions. Many of the questions that we end up spending lots of time producing in this kind of report. What is happening to Black students in our high schools? Who is enrolling in college? How soon do they enroll in college, and do they succeed? And if not, what can we do? We also need the state to really strengthen financial aid equity and ensure that students, especially at our community colleges, have access to the financial aid that they need to realize their dreams of graduating from college. The following are some recommendations specific to our community colleges and our universities. Specifically, we need to double down on implementing the historic placement reforms and elimination of remedial practices that have ensured that more Black California students, especially at the community colleges and the CSU, have access to college level courses with the supports they need to succeed. We also need to double down on the CSU's graduation initiative. It has been that initiative's intentional focus on increasing graduation rates and closing the gaps for Black students that has made a big difference, doubling the four-year graduation rate from 10% to 20%. But we know that that's not enough, and we need to do more. Finally, as Tyler mentioned, our colleges and universities need to do a much better job at ensuring greater faculty diversity and inclusion. There is no reason that our diverse student body shouldn't be able to see themselves reflected in the faculty, in the staff, in the college leaders that are there for them. We have specific recommendations for our high schools as well. In particular, we need to have a targeted increased goal of graduating 90% of Black California high school students. We also have recommended for many years that we make A through G courses the default curriculum in high school. Why? Because without it, we know that too few Black students are prepared for college and even for the opportunity to apply to the UC or the CSU. And finally, we are heartened by the recommendation in the governor's budget to make FAFSA and California DREAM Act financial aid applications mandatory in high school. We absolutely know that students need to understand that there are resources available for them to even believe that they can go to college. So with those recommendations, I'm really thrilled that we are joined today by my friend, Assembly Member Sydney Comliger. She also happens to be my assembly member. Assembly member Sydney Comliger has been an incredible champion advancing justice reform across California and has cared deeply about education equity. Assemblymember Comliger, thank you so much for making time and joining us this morning.
Well, thank you, Michelle. It is always good to see you. And I'm just so sorry with Zoom that we haven't been able to hang out in person and fight these fights. It's also good to see Audrey on here and so many friends from the education world. Before I was in the assembly, I served on the board of trustees for the Los Angeles Community College District, the largest community college district in the nation, and got an upfront and personal view of the enormous inequities that our Black students, that our brown students, that our students of color face as it relates to trying to find their way into this public education system pipeline. And it is true that the master plan has failed us. It has certainly failed Black students and brown students. I'm going to reintroduce myself. I'm Sydney Kamlager, Assemblywoman for the 54th State Assembly District, and also Vice Chair of the California Legislative Black Caucus. And I'm here to bring greetings from that caucus and to let this group know and the Zoom world that we are 100% committed to working to accelerate and increase the graduation rate for our Black students across California. It is in fact one of our pillars. We have two. One is Black economics and the other is Black education. I love when the Campaign for College Opportunity comes out with its reports because it is real talk and it is always right on time. I agree with so many of the recommendations and just want to share with you a little bit about what the caucus has been doing. So, we have been steadfast in our fight for local control funding formula and making sure that that formula are servicing our Black and our brown and our most needy students. Even as we talk about how to reopen schools, folks push back on LCFF and say, why are we doing it this way? But we are doing this way because we have found that the old formulas, that not having it, disproportionately impacts our people. And if we are going to be righteous and honest about what it takes to get our kids into school and out of school and graduating onto the next level, then we have to talk about economics and about funding. Black liberation does not happen without Black economic justice. It is as simple as that. The Black Caucus fought for ethnic studies. We fought for reparations. We have been at the forefront, as I mentioned, with LCFF. It is so critically important that we also begin to engage with our allies, talking about our teacher pools and how representative they are. There are a number of studies out there that say, that white teachers have lower expectations of non-white students. Black teachers have higher expectations of Black students. So we need to find them. In LA, fewer than 3% of the teachers teaching in LAUSD are Black male students. But we know that we have a number of Black boys who are students in our LAUSD system. And so we have got to make sure that our teacher pool is representative of the students who are being taught. It is also incredibly important to talk about student debt. Our Black students leave school with more debt than anyone else. And we are also 6 times as likely to be unemployed. So if you are going to talk about economic justice, and if you are going to talk about educational justice, you have to make sure that you are including, those data points in your discussions and how you're trying to advance policy. I was struck by some other pieces of data that I wanted to share. Black students are less likely than white students to have access to college-ready courses. Black students are often located in schools that have novice teachers, that have teachers that get lower pay, and the less qualified teachers. Black students spend less time in the classroom due to discipline. They are nearly 2 times as likely to be suspended without educational services than their white counterparts. They're 4 times as likely to receive 1 or more out of school suspensions. We know that Black students represent 19% of the preschool population, but 47% of them are being disciplined. Preschoolers are Black baby preschoolers. And Black students are less likely to be college ready. 61% of ACT tested Black students in the graduating class met none of the 4 ACT college readiness benchmarks. I found this statistic amazing. 61% of white high school dropouts are homeowners compared to 55% of Black college graduates. I'm going to repeat that again. 61% of white high school dropouts are homeowners compared to 55% of Black college graduates. So we have a lot of work to do at the federal level and in the state of California. When I was on the board for LACCD, we talked a lot about how we were funding our Umoja programs. We talked about how the colleges were going to diversify their staffing pools as well as their faculty pools, and not just adjunct, but also full-time. We talked about how to create stronger partnerships with nonprofit organizations so that community college students would have the kinds of supports that they needed to be successful. We talked about fully funding our Guardian Scholars programs for our community college students who were former foster care, making sure that they had supports around financial literacy, around housing, around transportation. And given the fact that they were often the first one in their cohort or in their neighborhood to go to college, even if it was community college, how to keep them there. We know our UC system this year reported amazing gains in terms of diversity in its admissions, but that hasn't been the case in years past. So how do we continue down this new trend? We should not have to have summers of racial reckoning to propel our UC and CSU bodies to find Black people to admit. But you can't admit folks who aren't ready, and you can't admit folks who haven't graduated. And so this pipeline of education is connected. It is interlocking from preschool to K through 12 and beyond. And I'm really excited about what we are going to be doing this year. Our first priority is to get schools reopened in a way that is safe. Our second priority is to help reimagine what our public education system looks like, especially for K through 12. If it's community schools, what kind of wraparound services they need, how to get around Prop 13, how to make sure that we are fully funding adequately and fully resourcing our public schools so that folks are not traveling, far and wide to get to the 2 or 3 schools that are well regarded. It's also how we evaluate and reform our financial aid system, that currently leaves working class and middle class students with thousands of dollars in debt and limited grant and scholarship opportunities. And we have to reevaluate our enrollment caps in our education system to figure out, we know the negative consequences, but now we have to address them. There are so many things. And if you are going to prioritize the success of Black people, you must start with education. It bleeds into and out of mass incarceration. It bleeds into and out of employment. It bleeds in and out of mortality rates. And so I'm just thankful that Michelle and her team continue to offer up the Black Report and continue to remind us of the importance of our Black folks who are in this game and the relationship that everyone else has to Black people and vice versa.
Thank you so much, Assemblymember Kamlager. We are so fortunate to have you in the leadership position that we have you as co-chair of the Black Caucus, but really championing all of the issues that matter. Absolutely agree with you. Black liberation requires Black economic justice. Black economic justice requires Black educational justice. Thank you so much for joining us today and for all you are doing in the state legislature. I get to now introduce some of my favorite people who have provided the Campaign for College Opportunity with lots of counsel, given their extensive wisdom and expertise in this field. The first person to speak to you is Dr. Frank Harris III.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Michelle. Let me first start by thanking our colleagues at the campaign for doing this important work and for being the leading voice for educational equity in our state. This 2021 State of Higher Education for Black Californians report offers some tangible evidence of the hard work and investments in Black lives and Black minds paying off. So for instance, we know Black enrollment and completion and transfer level coursework at our community colleges have increased over the past 5 years. We also see dramatic increases in the number of Black students pursuing enrollment in the UC and graduating from these institutions in a reasonable time frame. But clearly we have more work to do to ensure racial equity in education for Black Californians. Educational leaders who are serious about closing racial equity gaps should do these 5 things. First, read this report, and don't just read it. Use it to inform the conversations, planning, and action that's taking place in your organizations to inform efforts to bring about racial equity, particularly for Black students. Second, commit to being an anti-racist organization. And this entails a comprehensive audit of the racist policies and practices that are justified by racist ideas that ultimately enable racial inequity to exist and persist. Third, hold every educator accountable for teaching and serving Black students from an equity-minded and institutional responsibility perspective. But don't just stop there. Give them the tools, the knowledge, the information, and the resources that they need to build their capacity to be able to do so. Fourth, focus relentlessly on meeting students' basic needs, including housing, food, transportation, and as a result of the shift to remote learning due to the pandemic technology. Students cannot maximize their learning potential without these resources. And finally, we know those who often have the most promising solutions to a problem often lack the power that's needed to make these solutions happen. So proactively seek students' voices and perspectives, students like Tyler and Jamal and others like them. Ask them what they need and give it to them. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Harris. I'm now thrilled to introduce to you Pamela Haynes, the president of the California Community Colleges Board of Governors.
Thank you, Michelle. Yes, I am the board president, but I want to mention that I've spent the last 20 years plus as a local trustee on a community college board. And that experience informs what I'm about to say today, which will echo so much of what has already been said. I want to start off by thanking the campaign for its continued support of an annual evaluation and analysis of where we are, in particular of our Black Californians. It's critically important to keep that front and centered in the way and how we do our work, and to keep us motivated, not only on the data, because in so many cases, we already knew some of the challenges, but it's important to put those numbers and to keep that in the forefront. What I also want to say is that we need to make certain that we are preparing an action plan, not just a values plan, but an action plan. And part of that is to remove the obstacles. That includes building a supportive campus community for our students, to design clear pathways and to support those services that our students our support services that our students absolutely need. And I want to also say that we need to cut the red tape. the red tape of financial aid, the red tape around transfer. We also, and it goes without saying, we need to increase our faculty diversity. And we also, our campuses need to be able and be willing to say yes more than they say no, and to help find solutions and be part of the solutions that our students need. Somebody recently reminded me that the COVID crisis, while it has been horrendous, has also provided our institutions with an opportunity to look at our educational institutions and to continue and to stay focused on the course for reform, to remove those obstacles that are in the way that our students are facing on a daily basis. Those challenges that opportunity basically is really about looking at this moment in time and saying, what do we need to do in our institutions action-wise to change, to prepare, to restructure them so that they receive our students in a positive, proactive way, and to receive them where they are. It's been mentioned while Black Californians represent about 6% of the population, it is the 5th largest resident group in the nation in terms of African Americans. That should be noted, and we cannot leave anyone behind. If I leave you with one message, it is, let us continue to take action, not just words, but action on every one of the recommendations that have been made today. Those actions are in alignment with the Board of Governors, who recently approved the DEI implementation, the diversity, equity, and inclusion implementation to increase faculty diversity. It includes its support of AB 705 and not only its former implementation, but on the recommendations of what still needs to happen and how to move that ball forward for our Black and for our Brown students. So we do have a roadmap. Let's use that roadmap to make change. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Pam. We're so glad to have you where you are. It's now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Edward Bush, the president at Consumnes River Community College, and also the co-founder and vice president of Amend.
Good morning. It is indeed a pleasure to be with you this morning. I would like to also first start by congratulating the campaign for another outstanding report. This report and others, to me, is a reminder that the system is not broken. Again, this is a reminder that the system is not broken. For us to come up with recommendations and to have a real dialogue about what needs to happen to change the trajectory of African American students, it has to start with us being brutally honest that the system in its inception, as it was created, was not created with the well-being of Black folks in mind. It was not designed to free us. It was not designed around our health and our wealth and our well-being. That the same entities that erected and created our educational system in California are the same entities that were actively engaged and involved in our oppression. And so for us to reimagine and have a radical re-envisioning of our educational system, we must have the courage to recenter our educational focus. Right now, our education is centered around the concepts of white supremacy, institutional racism, and patriarchy. And in order for African Americans to be successful, then their experiences and culture, tradition, and humanity has to be the center. So it causes us now to rethink what we teach and how we teach, who we're serving and how we serve. And in order for us to achieve academic success, is going to be our willingness to call out the systemic racism that has been plaguing our institutions for far too long, and to put in power those who have our general interest in mind to dismantle, then reconstruct a brand new system where from the onset is designed for African-American students' success.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bush, for everything you do and for taking us to church. I now get to introduce Dr. Dawn Person. She's a professor of educational leadership at Cal State Fullerton. She's also part of, she's the director of the Center for Research on Educational Access and Leadership. Thank you, Dr. Person.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Michelle. It's my pleasure to have an opportunity to participate in this important time in looking at the report that the campaign has produced. Dr. Bush has said it all. I should just say ditto and put the mic down, but I will add to what he has said in saying that the work that the campaign has done, as I read the report, it really reveals the necessity for us to understand the essential need for our Black students in California. The report clearly shows that while there has been some progress made, there remains more to accomplish to fulfill the promise of the potential of Black student youth in California. It will require a perspective that I think is very important in this work. As we dismantle and reassemble the systems that we're in, we've got to think about the partnerships that have been created and need to be created between PK-12 schools and our community colleges and four-year institutions, so that we are at each step in the process in the educational system providing for Black students what they need when they need it. And that's essentially the foundational piece of equity and equity in education. I think that it's important that we go back to some of the fundamental learnings that we know from our historical Black educators. They taught from a position of care. They created communities of care in our schools so that when Black children educated by Black teachers went to elementary school and even in pre-K, they were taught from a position of care. Love was an element that was engaged and involved in the learning process. We need to get back to some of those fundamental teachings to help our young people know that they're valued, that they matter, and that they are critical and essential to the fabric of this country. They need to see, not just in February, that Black people have made contributions, but they need to see that year round. They need to understand that they have a responsibility to build and develop their potential to be successful. This happens by people taking on an anti-racist, which was mentioned earlier, I believe by Dr. Harris, mindset, and adapting that not only in the work that they do on a daily basis, but in their personal development and identity. We also need to have equity-based classroom environments. Until students, Black students, believe that they matter, that faculty and teachers believe in them and are committed to their success, we are going to have the gaps that continue to persist. So I say to each of us, for us to look at the partnerships that are currently in place, and let's stop being ashamed or embarrassed or afraid to say that Black children matter and that Black children need to be at the center of the partnership strategic plans so that we are able to move forward to make a difference in eliminating the opportunity gaps and achievement gaps that are still reflected, so clearly reflected in this report. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Person. I'm now thrilled to introduce Cassandra Jennings. She's the president of the Sacramento Urban League.
Thank you. Thank you. And this has been certainly a great and revigorating discussion today. I want to thank the campaign for your real talk. I like keeping it real and the advocacy that you have throughout the years. Um, you know, I want to, when I think about education and all that we need to do and this call to action, I like to keep it real because, and I think I represent a lot of people that are on the ground every day that really interact with our communities and know that the needs and the opportunities and the access is so important. So my call to action is twofold. One is that we must be intentional. And I would challenge all of the college leaders and professors and presidents and others to make racial equity your number one priority right now on your schools. And if you make it a priority, which means then it's going to be part of your goals and you will measure it annually, then we know you will pay attention to what you're measuring. So first, we got to be intentional because it doesn't happen because we will it, because we feel it. We need to move it to action. So let's be intentional about racial equity. The intentionality then moves to the second part, which is the action, is that we can dedicate, I challenge you all to dedicate a person in a place on your campus today where Black students can go to connect, to get support system, to cultivate a culture of inclusion and success. I think, and if you say you already have it, and I know there are some that do, then you need to step up your game because that's not enough. You need more. And with that intentionality and the action for people to go, you can then begin to address some of the issues and the barriers that are critical, like access to financial aid, like access to support, like being able to feel welcome in an environment to be successful. I have had the pleasure to serve on an African American advisory committee, not only for the UC system, but also for the community colleges throughout the state. And we have come up with 6 recommendations. But if we can just tackle this one right now, we can begin to open the doors for Black students to not only enter and thrive at community colleges, but graduate and be successful. Thank you. Thank you to the campaign, and thank you to all the great minds that we're hearing from today, as well as those that I'm sure are participating in this event.
Thank you so much, Cassandra. Now I'm going to turn it over to a good friend, an amazing leader, one of our reviewers who also gave us tons of counsel as we were developing this report, Dr. Darla Cooper. You all know her as the executive director of the RP group. She's also the board president of Umoja.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I appreciate the opportunity to be with all of you today. I want to share what I really appreciate about this report, in addition to the campaign's ongoing commitment to producing it for many years, and I know many years into the future, is that it presents both sides of the story. It presents both the successes and the challenges related to our Black and African American students in higher education in this state. The successes are not presented in a way that communicates that we should be satisfied or that our work is done. The challenges are not presented in a way that is discouraging or that there is little hope for us to have. Both are presented to show a more complete picture of where our support of these students is leading to their success and where we need to improve how we are supporting these students. We need more research that focuses on what is working, what is successful, not to pat ourselves on the back or to overshadow or ignore the challenges, but to elevate and to capitalize on and to expand these successes. That's why our most recent project at the RP Group, supported by Illumina Foundation, aims to deeply explore a finding from our Through the Gate study that among students who have completed all or most of their transfer requirements, African American Black students are the most likely to transfer. We want to do this study in order to learn what is helping students reach this tipping point at the community college, where they become more likely or most likely to be successful and to transfer. And finally, as the president of the Umoja Community Education Foundation Board, I would be remiss if I didn't mention recent research on how Umoja impacts Black student success, and that I'm excited to share that this study provides data that supports what many of us already knew, which is that Umoja students outperform their non-Umoja peers on a number of outcomes. Umoja is an example of what works. Umoja is making a difference in the lives and success of our Black students. We need more of that research to be out there, to be helping us serve these students better. I again want to thank and congratulate the campaign on their work in this area. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Darla, for joining us today, and to all of our respondents for your candidness, for your urgency of action, and for your support throughout the production of this report. You've indeed made it what it is today, and we'll give it the life it will have long beyond today. I'm Audrey Dow. I'm the Senior Vice President at the Campaign for College Opportunity, and it's an honor to be with all of you. I'll be facilitating our question and answer period, so thank you to everyone who has put their questions in the Q&A chat. We're going to do our best to get to as many as possible, but before I start, I did want to just take a minute to thank two more of our team members at the campaign who have contributed to today's success, and that is Amber Roman, who is our lead on all things social media, and every e-blast you probably all received inviting you to today came from Amber. I'd also like to thank Sasha Perez on our team, who leads our student engagement work, who collected and provided the student stories you hear and you read in the report, and our students that you're seeing speaking with us today. So thank you to our amazing team. Turning it over to the Q&A queue, I want to start with a lot of questions that came in regarding for-profit institutions. And the questions are really centering on the same theme. Why are Black students choosing, steered, forced to believe that for-profit institutions are a good choice such that they enroll? And what are the trends in terms of enrollment, and where can we find definitive data? So for that first kind of question, I'm going to turn to either Dr. Harris or Dr. Bush. I know that you are working with students day in and day out, and probably are helping them maybe in some cases figure out their decisions of where to enroll. Can you give us your thinking on why Black students are choosing to enroll in our for-profit institutions, both at the freshman level and at the transfer level?
Sure, I'd be happy to respond to this important question, Audrey. Well, I think it's quite simple. First, there's the issue of capacity. So if our students are not being admitted to our four-year public institutions and they want to stay in the state, where else are they going to go? So that's the first challenge, is that, and I think the report does a good job of talking about the need to expand access in our UC and CSU institutions so that more students who are eligible to go can have the opportunity to enroll. But there's another piece to this also, is that for-profit institutions are incredibly intrusive in their recruitment, and they do everything that they can to attract our students to their institutions. They're hands-on. They do a good job, at least initially, of letting students know that they matter and that they belong there. And they do everything that they can to make sure that they stay at the forefront of students' attention and decision-making at these critical moments when they're trying to decide where to go. So when you couple our capacity issues and access issues that we've had for decades for our public four-year institutions, and the intrusive strategies that are used for recruitment and enrollment in our for-profit institutions, and then when you have a community of folks who recognize that they need to get a bachelor's degree, that need access to higher education to improve their lives and their opportunity to be able to improve the lives of those who are counting on them, well, we can sort of see it paints a pretty clear picture as to why we see some of the data points that we see represented in the report. And it's problematic, but we can't call it out as problematic if we don't do a better job of making sure we expand access to our public four-year institutions. And I'm glad I didn't have to follow Dr. Bush.
No, you outstanding job. In fact, there's only one other thing that I could build on and not necessarily add. It's the #1 producer of Black graduate degrees and bachelor degrees is the University of Phoenix. So one of the things that we have to look at is relative is to what level of success have public post-secondary institutions have had with educating Black students in terms of degree attainment, right? So with all the problems, we understand all the issues surrounding Black students attending for-profit institutions. But before we critically examine what they're doing or not doing, we have to critically examine how we're not meeting those needs of African-American students and our ability to successfully graduate them. My sense is if we did a better job in handling our business, so to speak, then no student would choose to pay triple the cost to go to a for-profit institution if they felt that they had the same relative opportunity to meet their educational goal at paying less cost.
Thank you both for those responses. The next set of questions are really around A to G completion and both ends. One of the questions that we have on A to G is about why we have yet to set A to G as the default curriculum, and what will it take to ensure that every student has an equal opportunity to not only take but be successful in A to G. I know in the chat some individuals were sharing that there are campuses that have A to G for all, but A to G for all means a student can graduate with a D, and that doesn't make them eligible for the UC or CSU. And so I want to toss that question to Michelle to give her feedback on that.
Yeah, so A through G is obviously critical. I mean, one of the things that Vikash and I sort of had our aha moment is not only, right, that 61% of high school graduates aren't getting the A through G coursework, but that when they do get it, 80% of them enroll within 12 months directly into college. So that's why we want to make sure more students are prepared, but we also know that it's a clear indicator too that they're more likely to enroll in college within a year of high school graduation. So our recommendation is that it be the default curriculum. We know that tracking still continues to occur in our high schools, and that unfortunately underrepresented students and Black students in particular may be tracked out of the A through G courses and not even know it. As a first-gen college student, I don't know about many of you, but I always felt lucky I got tracked into A through G because I wouldn't have known that those are the courses I needed to take to get to college. And that's what we're trying to address. It should be the default curriculum, and we should support students to pass A through G with a C or better. We're not just talking pass with a D so you can graduate high school. We need students to be college ready.
Thanks, Michelle. And following up on that question, there is a question of, okay, let's say we get more students to complete A to G, but on the other end, we have real capacity constraints. How do we square the two? So I'm going to kick that to start us off. Jamal, as a UC regent, you're talking about at every regents meeting issues of capacity and equitable enrollment across the UC campuses. So talk to us a little bit about your thoughts on that question.
It's a great question, an important question. So I want to just kind of bring in and just kind of frame the conversation, not around the idea of expanding capacity within our public higher education systems, but equitably expanding capacity within our public higher education systems. Sometimes it can be really tempting to create a two-tiered structure within the university. I think that we're flirting a lot with that in the distance or remote learning frame, where we allow more so an exclusively non-on-campus variant that does mitigate the value of the education through the soft skills, the networking, the access to resources and things like this. So we really need to be mindful about how, as we increase our diversity and as we increase our capacity, that we're still giving each of the students that do attend full access to the benefits of a public California higher education. With that said, there absolutely needs to be a stronger articulation between the curriculum that is taught in high school and community college and that which they'll receive in the CSU and the UC. As it stands, the relationship between those two curriculums are rather tenuous. There's been some moves and a lot of conversation, especially at the regental level, about strengthening those pipelines to make sure that people aren't taking classes that they don't need to take, or aren't learning stuff that isn't directly transferable, or aren't just broadly preparing for something that will never come to pass. And that means that we need to take a bi-directional approach, that we need to absolutely have the conversation at the K through 12 level to make sure that that curriculum is standardized and applied equally across the demographics and of the students and the resource levels of those districts, but also at the university level to make sure that we're being institutionally and structurally receptive of those students coming through so that they're not ill prepared to take full advantage of the resources when they arrive.
Thank you, Jamal. I'm going to get through 3 more questions. So I'm going to ask our respondents to keep our responses as concise as they can be. The next question I'm going to throw over to Pam Haynes and/or to Darla Cooper, or both of you. And the question is, does WASC or other accreditation organizations have input or accountability measures that they consider related to institutional DEI? Now, while WASC or accreditation organizations may not, but our governing boards for our California community colleges can definitely play an important role in that. So I'd love, Pam and Darla, your thoughts on that question about accountability for DEI efforts.
So Carla may have a much more scholarly response. My response is that in the past, it has not focused in on the diversity of a faculty. It hasn't risen. That has not risen as one of the elements that it looks at intently, but it does beg the question of maybe it should be doing that, since there is this direct correlation.
Darla?
Yes, I haven't been as involved with accreditation as I used to be, but I do know that it is something that is being looked at finally. Whether it's to the extent to which it needs to be, I don't want to make that assessment. I would leave that to others to do that. But it's an excellent question that was asked, and more pressure needs to be put on accrediting commissions to say this is important, and you shouldn't be accrediting colleges that aren't looking at these things and are not accountable for DEI.
Thank you, Darla. The next question I'm going to pose back to Dr. Bush, because I think we've been talking about this, and to Dawn Person as well. But how might we think about creating a new policy that mirrors Hispanic serving institution incentives, but for Black scholars here in California? Clearly, we have a lot of institutions in California, both our CSU and community colleges that are designated as HSIs, as well as Anapeesis, that are serving our Asian students, but we don't have, other than one HBCU. And I think this is something, again, that's been talked about. What are your thoughts on that question?
Dr. P, do you want to start, since I've already talked, and get in and I'll follow you?
I think it's an interesting idea to think about. And I feel like, and Ed, I'm sure is going to comment on this as well, that there are models that are available that we can consider, both here in California and at the federal level and other states as well. I think there's been a hesitancy, as I said in my earlier comments, to really focus on Black students and the Black community. And the idea, as our numbers have somewhat decreased in certain parts of the state, I think it's almost given people permission to not be that invested, but to talk about students of color in general. And we can see that that is not working. That has not been a successful approach for us to take. So I'm committed to and very interested in seeing the partnership work that's being done. A2Men and Umoja has partnered most recently and are looking at, and I think presenting models and possibilities for equity-based, Black-focused interventions that work, and building that and helping our assembly people, our legislative folks understand and recognize the importance of us being very focused and intentional on Black students. I've always been an advocate for us learning again, as I said earlier, from what we know the HBCUs have successfully done. for many, many years. And we need to bring some of those interventions into our environments, but we need to have the right people in place for those interventions to be effective. Ed?
Yeah, I think that was comprehensive. For the sake of time, I'll pass. I think Dr. Person covered that.
Thank you both. We are almost at time, so we are going to wrap up our question and answer session. Thank you so much to everyone who asked a question, and again to all of our respondents for answering so brilliantly and thoughtfully. This is just the beginning of a conversation that we hope to continue having with all of you who have joined us. Many of our respondents today are our partners that we are working day in and day out with, and these are the topics we're talking about and grappling with and moving to take action. It's now my pleasure to introduce our My Campaign for College Opportunity board member, the co-founder of Students Making a Change, and the head of Organizational Health and Innovation at the Justice Collective, Lena Carew, to close us out. Thank you, Lena, for being with us today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I would like to summarize our time together today and the findings outlined in the report. We're grounded by the fact that Black Californians are experiencing harm due to two pandemics, the coronavirus on the one hand and the racial pandemic on the other. With this grounding in mind, we remind ourselves of the incredible work of activists, organizers, educators, advocates, and policymakers in advancing success for Black students. Today, we learned there are bright spots for Black Californians, that an overwhelming number, almost 90% of Black Californians age 19 have a high school diploma, that Black Californians who complete A through G upon completion of high school are highly likely to enroll in college within a year of graduation, that bold reforms to community college course placement practices and access to transfer level courses has dramatically increased for California's Black community college students. And we have seen increases among Black Californians in CSU and UC graduation rates and UC applications. We also heard that while strides have been made, we continue to see patterns and data that must be addressed with urgency, that too many Black students are unsupported to meet A through G requirements. Too few Black students enroll in college within a year of high school graduation. Too many Black students are unsupported to earn a certificate or degree transfer to a four-year university or institution and transfer or are transferred prepared within 2 years, often taking 6 years or more. It's true too that racial achievement gaps and graduation rates persist. Black students are overrepresented in for-profit colleges and universities where the costs are high, as are loan default rates. This is particularly alarming when Black Californians already suffer from income inequality and other systemic injustices. It's more important than ever that we center the success of Black Californians in our educational institutions. And while data is an extremely powerful tool, it is our collective effort and dedication to Black student success that will lead to the change we must see. While we consider opportunities to improve policies and law, we must also consider ways to shift culture and eliminate negative internalized beliefs about Californians' worthiness to access and achieve higher ed. Thank you so much to everyone who has contributed to the development of this report and the presentation today. Thank you to each of our presenters, Dr. Luke, for setting the tone for today and grounding our work together. Tyler and Jamal for boldly and courageously sharing your personal stories and respective leadership in advancing this work. Vikash for presenting the findings and helping us understand their implications. Assembly Member Kamlager for your calls for policy reforms. And to each of our presenters, advisors, and contributors for your calls to action with a recurring theme to focus on intentional and unapologetic centering of Black students and their success. It's my pleasure to present this summary for you today. We appreciate each and every one of you for taking the time to listen to Black voices and Black stories while considering the report's findings and its implications. And we hope that you walk away today with a deepened commitment to racial justice and for Black Californians in higher education. And a final thank you for your support of the Campaign for College Opportunity. I hope you stay safe and healthy. Thank you.